When we try to picture a threat, especially something as dark as online predator, our brains usually default to a very specific, almost cinematic image.
Right, yeah. Like the whole basement thing.
Exactly. We picture the creepy loner isolated in a dark basement, surrounded by glowing monitors, completely disconnected from normal society.
Which is, I mean, in a weird way, that image is kind of comforting.
It is, because
Yeah.
a guy like that stands out. He's obviously the threat. But when you step into the actual modern data on technology-facilitated child sexual exploitation, that whole basement image completely shatters.
It actively misleads us. I mean, relying on that stereotype is creating a massive blind spot that predators are, well, more than happy to exploit.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission for today's deep dive is to analyze a massive, first-of-its-kind 2026 comparative study.
Right.
We are pulling from the Journal of Interpersonal Violence and a really groundbreaking report called L'Ombre Numérique, or the Digital Shadow.
Yeah, and the scope here is huge. Researchers surveyed roughly 4,900 adult men across the US, the UK, and Australia.
And the goal was to find out who these technology-facilitated offenders actually are. Not just the ones who get caught, but the ones operating undetected right now in the general population.
Right, and what makes this so solid is the researchers matched the survey pools to census demographics in all three countries.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they control for things like age, um, income, education. Because of that rigorous matching, we're getting a highly accurate look at the true demographic profiles of these men.
And for you listening, this isn't just some abstract criminological study. Whether you're a parent, someone navigating the online dating world, or just an everyday citizen using encrypted apps, understanding how these offenders operate fundamentally changes how you should view internet safety.
Absolutely.
And the data reveals a massive discrepancy based purely on national borders. Which brings us to the geography of all this.
Yeah, so the researchers looked at the prevalence of this behavior across the three countries. This includes actions like having sexual conversations with minors online, paying for explicit webcam interactions, or deliberately viewing abuse material.
Right.
So in the UK, the prevalence rate among the men surveyed was exactly 7.0%, and in Australia, it was 7.5%.
But then you look at the United States, and the rate jumps to 10.9%.
Yeah, it's a huge jump.
Statistically, more than 1 in 10 men surveyed in the U.S. sample self-reported engaging in technology-facilitated child sexual exploitation. Like, when you see a gap that large between similar Western democracies, it points to a systemic difference, right? Not just cultural variance.
Exactly. The researchers attribute this difference directly to internet regulation. The U.S. has this very laissez-faire approach to internet governance.
Right, heavily influenced by laws like the Communications Decency Act of 1996.
Yeah, specifically Section 230 of that act, which gives tech platforms broad civil and criminal immunity for third-party content.
So they aren't liable.
Right. The platforms themselves aren't held legally responsible for what their users post or do.
I mean, it's essentially a massive superhighway with no speed limits, no guardrails, no highway patrol, and we're just trusting the drivers to behave.
That's a great way to put it. Whereas the UK and Australia have mandated, traffic calming measures.
Right.
Both countries recently implemented proactive online safety acts,
Yeah.
the UK in 2023 and Australia in 2021. Those laws mandate safety by design.
Meaning they force tech platforms to build user protection into their architecture.
Yes, and to proactively search for and remove abusive material.
But wait, I'm stuck on this because the internet is borderless, right? If I open a social media app in London or Texas, I'm interacting with the exact same global network.
Right, you are.
So how does a domestic UK law actually stop an offender from accessing the same material a US offender does?
Well, it comes down to corporate compliance and geolocation. The internet feels borderless to us, but under the hood, massive tech companies know exactly where you're logging in from.
Oh, okay.
If a social media giant wants to operate in the UK without facing massive revenue-crushing fines, they have to deploy specific algorithms and moderation teams tailored to the UK's legal threshold.
Oh, so they basically geofence their safety protocols.
Exactly. The data clearly shows that when governments mandate that tech companies proactively alter their architecture, the overall prevalence of the abuse actually drops.
Wow. So regulation actively disrupts the development of these digital black markets,
It does.
which means the people exploiting these legal loopholes in the U.S. aren't just impulsive, disorganized criminals. They are highly aware of the environment they're operating in.
Absolutely.
And that leads us to the demographic profile of who is actually taking advantage of this, which takes us so far away from the loner in a basement stereotype.
The demographic data completely rewrites the profile. Let's look at their proximity to children in the real world first.
Okay.
Across all 3 jurisdictions, online offenders are 2 to 3.7 times more likely to actively work with children compared to non-offenders.
That is terrifying.
Yeah, they deliberately seek out professional environments that grant them access.
And the rest of their lives look like a model citizen's resume, basically. They possess what criminologists usually consider protective social factors. The exact traits you'd normally assume would keep someone from committing crimes.
What's fascinating here is how these factors play out across the different countries. So in the UK, the offenders were significantly more likely to be employed.
Okay.
In the US, they were significantly more likely to hold a bachelor's degree or higher, to be married or living with a partner, and to live in a major city.
Wow.
And in both the US and the UK, they were significantly more likely to actually have a child living in their own household. We're talking about educated, employed, married family men.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The study dives into the ongoing debate about how the legal system handles these cases when they actually do go to court.
Yeah, the sentencing phase.
Right. So let's say one of these men is caught and goes to a sentencing hearing. Defense attorneys will frequently bring in good character references.
Oh, all the time.
They'll have colleagues, neighbors, friends write letters to the judge saying, he's a dedicated professional, loving father, a pillar of the community.
This charge is completely out of character.
Exactly. And judges routinely give real weight to those references. Because the judicial logic is that a long track record of good behavior in society should mitigate the punishment.
Right, for what they perceive as an isolated digital crime.
But if we look at the data we just outlined, the dark irony of that courtroom scenario is overwhelming.
Totally.
If being outwardly respectable, highly educated, and employed is the actual statistical profile of a technology-facilitated offender, then those character references shouldn't be mitigating factors.
No, not at all.
They're describing the predator's camouflage.
Exactly. The researchers define this as cultivating a cloak of respectability. These men aren't living stable, outward-facing lives in spite of their offending.
Right.
They were using their positive public reputations, their careers, and their family structures as a deliberate shield to evade suspicion. I mean, if you look like a devoted father with a great job, society naturally lowers its defenses around you. So the good character isn't evidence of a mistake. It's the very mechanism they use to sustain the offending over long periods without getting caught. It's a highly sophisticated form of social evasion.
So since their offline lives are meticulously constructed to look normal, we can't rely on real-world red flags. We have to look at their online behavior to spot the threat.
Right.
And if you want to find these guys, the data says you look at their broader browser history.
Yeah, the data reveals a baseline of intense hypersexuality. Extreme adult content is a massive indicator here.
Right.
Compared to non-offending men, these offenders are 6.7 to 17 times more likely to view bestiality material.
Oh my God.
They are 3.9 to 6.5 times more likely to watch violent or rough pornography. And they're 6 to 8.6 times more likely to actually pay for online sexual services and content.
We're looking at an entirely different magnitude of consumption.
Absolutely.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it explains a critical mechanism of how this behavior develops, right? The study points out that heightened paraphilic interest and hypersexuality in legal adult spheres often bleed over into illegal behaviors.
The boundary degrades over time.
Right. They have a broader, intense preoccupation with extreme sexual content that just gradually escalates.
And this escalation doesn't stay confined to obscure pornography sites either. They are highly active on everyday platforms.
Like what?
Specifically, mainstream romance and dating apps.
Wow.
The researchers noted that these offenders are disproportionately present on the exact same dating apps millions of single adults use every day.
And the deep dive highlights real cases where single mothers ended up exploiting their own children at the behest of these online boyfriends they met on dating platforms.
It's a terrifying psychological manipulation.
It really is.
Yeah.
Instead of hunting for children directly, which is risky and easily flagged, they hunt for vulnerable adults.
It functions exactly like a Trojan horse. The offender uses the socially acceptable, welcomed romance with the adult to bypass the family's natural defensive boundaries.
Right.
Once they're inside the walls, metaphorically speaking, they leverage that romantic influence over the parent to gain access to the child.
It's like finding a great white shark not in the deep ocean, but in a local community swimming pool.
Right. Swimming right alongside us.
But hold on, if they're spending significant amounts of money on extreme adult porn sites, and they're lingering on mainstream dating apps utilizing this Trojan horse strategy,
Yeah.
shouldn't the tech companies hosting these platforms be connecting the dots? Like, why aren't dating apps and adult sites cross-referencing this hyper-extreme viewing data to flag potential offenders before they escalate?
Well, because of the regulatory gap we discussed in the beginning.
Ah, right.
There are a few emerging initiatives trying to detect men seeking abuse material on adult sites to refer them to prevention services, but they're entirely voluntary.
So there's no teeth to it.
Exactly. Broadly speaking, the adult entertainment industry and the dating app industry operate without those strict safety by design mandates.
Right.
Without a legal requirement forcing them to build architecture that monitors and intervenes across different platforms, there's just zero commercial incentive for these companies to aggressively police their own paying customers.
Right. So we have a demographic of legally savvy, highly educated men using romance apps to bypass family defenses, operating in a regulatory environment that doesn't force companies to connect the dots.
It's a perfect storm.
It really is. And that leaves the operational side. How do they execute and finance the actual acquisition of illegal material without law enforcement noticing?
It starts with a deeply disturbing commercial element. The survey found that these offenders are 7 to 14.75 times more likely to report being approached online by a minor who is actively selling sexual content.
Wow, meaning this isn't just passive viewing of old material.
Yeah.
It's an active, ongoing, transactional black market.
It is a live market, and it's happening across everyday youth-oriented platforms.
Of social media.
Yeah. Depending on the country, the offenders were disproportionately active on apps like Instagram, Snapchat, and Discord. Yeah. The study cites other research showing large networks of accounts openly advertising self-generated, explicit content for sale. And to facilitate that black market safely, the offenders weaponize privacy tools.
Because the data shows an incredibly high level of premeditation regarding their digital footprint.
Oh, absolutely.
These men are 3 to 5 times more likely to use encrypted messaging apps like Telegram. In the US and the UK, they heavily favor Signal.
Right.
And in the US, they also use the Tor browser to access the dark web, as well as an encrypted app called Hive.
Yeah, and in Australia, they're much more likely to use VPNs.
Right.
And it's worth explaining the mechanism of how a VPN functions in this context.
Yeah, break that down for us.
So a virtual private network essentially builds a secure encrypted tunnel between the user's computer and a remote server, masking their actual IP address.
Okay.
If an offender in Australia wants to bypass the strict moderation of Australia's Online Safety Act, they use a VPN to route their connection through a server in the United States.
Oh, I see.
Suddenly, to the social media platform, they appear to be a U.S. user, effectively rendering the local Australian law useless for that specific session.
That is so calculated. And to move the money for these transactions, they rely heavily on cryptocurrency.
Right.
The offenders are 2.7 to 4.28 times more likely to use crypto to finance their online purchases.
Which effectively severs the financial trail from their traditional bank accounts.
Exactly.
And this raises an important question, because we are now entering the intense tech policy debate surrounding end-to-end encryption. The data definitively proves that these offenders deliberately set up secure, untraceable communication channels.
To exploit children with total impunity.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? I mean, tools like Signal and VPNs were designed to protect vulnerable people.
Right, they have legitimate uses.
They provide essential data privacy for everyday citizens. They are literal lifelines for journalists protecting sources or dissidents living under oppressive regimes who need to communicate without being tracked by authoritarian governments.
Absolutely.
The ethical dilemma here is massive. Are we supposed to weaken privacy for everyone just because these predators are using encryption as their digital getaway cars?
It is arguably the defining tech policy paradox of our time, and it hinges on the mathematics of cryptography.
Right.
Law enforcement and child protection advocates look at data exactly like this study and argue that unbreakable encryption on massive commercial platforms provides a dark, unpoliceable sanctuary for predators.
Yeah, they argue tech companies should be required to build a back door into the encryption.
Right, like a special key that only law enforcement can use to access messages when they have a warrant.
But cybersecurity experts argue that a backdoor is mathematically impossible to keep safe.
Exactly. From a security engineering standpoint, a vulnerability is a vulnerability.
Right.
You cannot design an encryption backdoor that only the good guys can walk through. If the backdoor exists, state-sponsored hackers, cyber terrorists, or identity thieves will eventually find it and exploit it.
Which compromises the banking, healthcare, and communication infrastructure of the entire society.
Exactly.
It's a terrifying trade-off. Society demands privacy, but the mathematical cost of that privacy is a secure infrastructure that predators can use for exploitation.
Yeah.
And the study makes it clear. The technology sector is fully aware this is happening. The platforms know their encrypted services are being utilized this way.
Right. And without strict regulatory pressure, the default position of many tech companies is to prioritize overall user privacy over proactive child safety.
Because prioritizing user privacy is mathematically simpler and commercially safer for them than attempting to engineer complex, legally perilous monitoring systems.
Exactly.
Man. Well, let's distill the core revelations we've covered today. We started by learning that a lack of internet regulation directly correlates to higher abuse rates.
Right.
The laissez-faire approach in the U.S. creates a fertile environment, whereas the safety by design mandates in the UK and Australia actively suppress the prevalence of this behavior.
And we completely dismantle the psychological profile of the offender. They hide behind a cloak of respectability. They are statistically likely to be well-educated, employed, married, and even living with children, using those exact traits as camouflage to manipulate the legal system and society.
We also mapped out their digital footprints, finding that extreme adult porn consumption and violent sexual content act as major red flags.
Yeah.
We saw how they utilize a Trojan horse strategy on everyday dating apps, targeting single parents to bypass family defenses.
Right.
And finally, we explored how they deliberately weaponize encrypted apps, VPNs, and cryptocurrency to operate an active transactional black market in the shadows.
For you listening, the biggest takeaway should be a fundamental shift in vigilance.
Yeah.
Relying on the stereotype of the creepy loner actively endangers children by making you blind to the real threat.
Yeah.
Awareness of this data-backed profile is the very first step in true vigilance.
Absolutely.
Whether you are swiping on a dating app, evaluating who has access to your family, or monitoring what platforms your child is using, you have to know what the actual behavior looks like.
But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Something that builds on the data in this study, but flips the script on how we might solve the problem.
Okay.
Throughout this deep dive, the debate has centered on policing tech companies, regulating social media's platforms, and the impossible math of breaking encryption.
Right.
But the data shows us that these offenders are highly reliant on paying for extreme adult content. And they heavily utilize cryptocurrency to fund the microtransactions of this black market.
It's a financial ecosystem just as much as it is a digital communications network.
Exactly. So what if the ultimate solution isn't about policing the technology? What if it's about policing the money?
Oh, interesting.
Think about how your credit card works. If you travel and buy a $5 coffee in a foreign country, your bank uses incredibly complex predictive AI to instantly freeze your card.
Right. It spots the anomaly.
Yeah. It detects an anomaly in your location and spending habits that suggests fraud, and it shuts the transaction down in milliseconds. The global financial sector possesses the most sophisticated tracking algorithms on Earth.
They monitor billions of microtransactions a day with stunning accuracy.
So why shouldn't financial institutions be mandated by law to deploy that exact same predictive AI to detect the specific hidden microtransactions and crypto exchanges that fuel the digital child abuse black market?
That's a huge point.
Right. If the tech companies are hiding behind the impenetrable math of end-to-end encryption, maybe the strategy is to cut off the oxygen at the bank.
Wow.
The threat isn't a shadowy figure lurking in a cinematic basement. He's a guy with a great resume, a nice family, and a smartphone, hiding in plain sight. And it's time our defenses finally evolved to catch him.